And when we ask questions, we get clarity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of times we do jump, and I've been doing this myself. It's like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Stop, slow down, get clarity on the situation, because I've learned over time that when I get clarity, we're in that, it's in that escalation point, but we're not going to go to the blow up point. We're not going to get to that boiling point, because once you get clarity and understanding, it's like, oh, I was over here and you're over there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are in two separate places. Now I'm understanding where you're at. Maybe I had expectations of something, but I didn't discuss it with Alisa, but now I have a clear understanding of what the expectation is. And so we can get out of this conflict cycle and not get to that boiling point.
Mama says namaste.
Mama says namaste.
Making a family can be easy and fun.
Oh, yeah, but raising a family can be a whole different story.
From spouses to kids to the crazy daily grind, life often directs us away from connection and more into reactive chaos.
If you're tired of that cycle and are seeking something beyond the picket fence blues, this is the show for you.
I'm Ashley.
And I'm Nathan.
And we're here to take you from chaos to clarity by bringing awareness and intention into your home, not waiting for one day, and highlighting how
the uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us.
Take a deep breath in and let's start a brand new day. With Mama says namaste.
All right, we are back with another guest interview with our friends Tony and Alisa DiLorenzo. They have written the book 6 Pillars of Intimacy, and we're here to talk about the next level of this pillars of intimacy and those things when things do not go all peachy cream with your family. So we want to look for, we want to talk about that with Tony and Alisa today. So as always, whenever we are doing an interview, you get to listen to it, you get to read it, as we have a transcript and blog edition pulled, as well as on a YouTube video where you get to see us as well. So Nathan and I are doing this from the same state as Tony and Lisa today. We're all in California, and we're hanging out in my brother-in-law's recording studio to get this interview in. So I'm excited for us to dive in. So thanks for being with us again, Tony and Alisa.
Yes.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
I did enjoy the backdrop of the recording studio. A little different visual.
Yeah, totally.
Yes. The kids are actually right now currently songwriting with their uncle, working on a song together. And so it's been very cool to have the musical inspiration, and they're planning on doing some singing and recording right here in this little studio.
They're very excited.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, so you had a new book that came out this month.
Yes.
Right? Yes. So let's give a little intro into of course, just a backstory, as a quick update as to who all you are. Again, this is not the first interview that we have done with Tony and Alisa, and so I will be linking to the other interview that we have with them in the show notes as well, so that you can access both of those. But yes, so you've written your book. So share about where you're at this point, and and why you chose to write your new book.
So this book is entitled The 6 Pillars of Intimacy, Conflict Resolution, The Secret to Breaking the Conflict Cycle in Your Marriage. And the timing was right for this book. Every coaching session that I do has some element of conflict in it. And what I found was that I was repeating, the skills and strategies of my coaching clients. And Tony and I had a conversation one day, and he's like, why haven't we put this into a book yet? And that was really the genesis of it's time to write the next book in the 6 Pillars of Intimacy series. And that's really, the heart for this book was to give couples that might not be sure about coaching yet, not know what that was going to look like, really tools that they could get started with, and just an awareness of what the conflict cycle looks like in their own marriage.
Gotcha. Wonderful. Okay. And so my first question for you in this is, how do we tend to bring conflict into our marriage? Where do the roots of these oftentimes come from? I know you have a lot of this laid out, and it's very eye-opening to even read about that, because I think sometimes in marriage, we don't recognize the conflict we're bringing into it.
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead, Nick.
Well, we just come with our own kind of framework that we think, works, and then we try to blend it. And so
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about those frameworks is that if you actually start to go back and look at where did those frameworks come from, our models for how we do conflict are the families that we were raised in, those circumstances, how we saw, mothers and fathers, whether they were, great at doing conflict in front of us or not so great at doing conflict in front of us. And to everybody out there that's like, oh, that was really bad. We've all done it. So there's no judgment on this side. But what we've learned, watching our parents, what they fought about, how they fought. We bring all of that, whether, consciously or unconsciously, into our marriages. And we think of it as just, well, that's who I am. Mm-hmm. But when you start to unpack and see the patterns, you realize, oh, this looks a lot like what I saw 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
Right.
And when Alisa and I first got married, we've been married 26 years now. Mm-hmm. We have 2 kiddos. But when we first got married, we realized, this is years later, as we're looking at, our own marriage, we're growing, we're going through the steps to have an extraordinary marriage ourselves. And we begin to realize, wow, when it comes to conflict, I'm very much like what I saw growing up with my mom, my dad, my aunts, my uncles, my nonna. We're Italian. It's loud. Everybody is speaking with their hands. They're moving. They're doing this. They're doing that. But at the end of the night, everybody would give each other a kiss. They'd all go home. And everybody would be good. And so that's what I saw growing up.
And I saw, my mom and dad, when they would fight, we didn't have the close extended family like Tony grew up in. And so like if my dad even raised his voice just a bit, my mom would completely shut down, remove herself, and stop talking until she was ready to re-engage. And
re-engagement it could
take some time.
Hours, or it could be days.
It could take, and full disclosure, my mom knows that I tell this story. So, I'm not throwing my parents under the bus. But in that, when those two styles came together, it was really challenging.
And I'm sure you guys talked about that when you were first dating. Like, I like to fight this way and you like to fight that way, right?
If only we did cover all this.
Never. I don't really.
Dating, it was perfect la la land. And if something came up, it was just sort of like, well, we'll get over this, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Love will conquer all. This will not be a problem until, you've got days upon days of little irritations, and then it blows up. So, yeah.
I remember our early years of marriage. Sometimes we would have these arguments and like neither of us knew what to do. And we would just be sitting in our first apartment in Palm Desert, California. And I would be like going after it, and Alisa would be shutting down, and then nothing would happen for days. Yeah. I mean, it was just like, wow, okay, how are we going to get over this?
Right.
Yeah.
And those little cycles can just be the weight in a relationship that we're kind of tiptoeing around, and we're trying to navigate around each other that can become reasons we pull apart.
Well, and if we don't ever develop skills when it comes to conflict, there is a term, irreconcilable differences, that a lot of people default to when it comes to divorce. And so if we don't learn how to do conflict, we can just kind of lump all of that into we have irreconcilable differences, and then it's easy to move on.
Yes, that's so true. Okay, so in the book, you talk about a cycle, that there is a conflict cycle. So can you elaborate on that for us here?
Absolutely. And again, this came out of thousands upon thousands of hours of talking to couples. And I would hear every couple could describe their cycle, whether they'd ever put it down on paper or not. They understood, oh, he's going to say this, and then she's going to do this, and then she's going to, and it's this dance. And so, the 5 stages of the cycle are: first, conflict starts, right? There's that initial, oh, the air just changed. That word was a little sharper. Where did that come from? Like, those are the kind of thoughts that can go through your head. Then you can move into this place of escalation. You're still kind of like hoping that it's not going to go there, but you're like, this is feeling a little more tense. The body language is starting to change. And then it will go to the boiling point. And that's either the full blown, like there's an explosion in the middle of the living room or dining room or car, wherever you are. Or, in my case, when we would get to the boiling point, I would turn into an iceberg and just completely go cold. Then you move into the cool down, and that looks different, for every couple, but that's that place where everybody's just trying to get their emotions back under control, kind of get back into some form of emotional regulation. There's usually distance between husband and wife. And then the 5th stage is either, resolution, where we've actually solved it, or just a return to status quo. And, as I see in so many of my coaching clients, that's let's just sweep it under the rug, pretend it didn't happen, get back to, doing our daily lives. We'll just start talking to one another, but we don't actually address
Right.
the problem that kicked off the cycle in the first place.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point too, is that you identify the cycle and you talk about how you can go through the whole cycle and still not have resolution. It's not just that you complete the cycle and you're good. That does not give you that guarantee. So when you were talking about this too, I mean, there are the focus is looking at specific, how do you read this? And, what are body responses? What are cues that you can see? So are there some that are kind of a typical, some classic things to look for, or does it tend to be very, very specific for each person?
Well, I think, what I found, Ashley, is that most couples have never sat down to even diagram this for themselves. And that's why we put the companion workbook to go along with the book. It's a free download at the beginning of the book. But what I find with so many of my clients is when they start to diagram what's happening between husband and wife, and then what's also happening internally on their internal conflict cycle, light bulbs start going off. They start seeing, oh, when conflict starts, I can feel it physiologically. I always knew when Tony was feeling a little amped up about something when we were in the car, because his palms get sweaty. And so if he would put his hand in front of the vents while he was driving, I'm like, oh, he's feeling a little irritated. Like I would just, that was a tell.
It was a clue. It was a cue. You know what I mean? And she already knew that, but internally I knew it was happening. And it was just interesting how Lisa and I, over the years of just engaging in our emotional intimacy and strengthening it, she began to pick up like, oh, something's coming up because he's putting his hand up against that vent. Something's going on internally with him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I remember I could always sense like when Nathan was getting at his max, because this jawbone here would just get way tighter and a little bit more intense. And and if there's a lot of frustration, then it might even jet forward a little bit. And so I would recognize, facial cues.
Yeah.
Body language is huge. That's what I tell my girls when I'm driving. If both my hands are on the wheel, then we need to keep it quiet.
10 and 2, do not speak.
You're like, we're going through something difficult right now. Dad needs his utmost attention on the road to get us there safely.
Yeah.
But I would imagine it's hard to find. It's kind of helping people shift from this is what's angering me to, okay, you're kind of looking at the other person now and trying to gauge what they're doing and what they're feeling so that you can adjust your behavior.
Well, and that's where taking the time to really diagram this is so valuable, because I don't want anybody to try and guess, but rather to have the knowledge, oh, when my spouse is feeling, when we're in conflict starts and my spouse immediately goes to a response that, they're having the thought of, what did I do wrong this time? This is a very, common response. And once the other spouse knows that, it's very easy to initiate the conversation and to say, hey, I know you might be thinking you did something wrong. This isn't actually about you. We're dealing with this problem. And so it can diffuse that right at the very beginning, because you know where your spouse's thought patterns go. You can address it and be proactive, and that can immediately start to lower the tension and that sense of impending doom, because you've identified what their number one thought is and that it's not that.
Yes. And so, I mean, like so many things, bringing awareness to it and just a little bit of intentionality around it can really reframe it. And it's very powerful to do this, on a worksheet when we're feeling all friendly with one another than in the heat of the moment. So as you're getting into the escalation phase, where we know we're in the heat of the moment, you talk about some specific questions to kind of work through that, because this is not we're going to dive through and analyze the conflict as we're in the conflict. So what do we brace ourselves for or check ourselves on as far as questions before escalation?
Well, probably the biggest one is to really take a breath. And I talk a lot about breathing in this book, because sometimes it's so quick for us to go on autopilot and our nervous system just takes over and it's like, okay, shallow breathing. And we're just going to go into, these triggered responses. But if you can stop and say, hey, wait, what are we really fighting about? What is the actual problem that needs to be addressed? Because in most cases, it's not your spouse. You might be upset about your finances or about the kids or about the in-laws or about the bills. And and you're making it a, me versus you situation. It's like, in fact, I had this happen with a coaching client yesterday. Husband got really angry at a wife because they were trying to clean up the kitchen, bacon grease spills, a whole thing. And when I started digging into the husband, I go, what was the actual thought there? He goes, they have 2 little kids. He goes, I was scared one of the kids would have come in and the bacon grease was hot and they would have gotten burned. So the problem wasn't that my wife had dropped bacon grease on the floor.
Yeah.
It was, I was terrified that our children might have gotten burned. And when you could identify, the problem wasn't her, it was his own fear. They were able to walk through that even in coaching. All of a sudden, she looks at him much differently when she knows that he's scared about the kids getting burned than the accusation of, what did you do? Why are you doing this? It's totally different interaction.
And when we ask questions, we get clarity. A lot of times we do jump, and I've been doing this myself. It's like, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Stop, slow down, get clarity on the situation, because I've learned over time that when I get clarity, it's in that escalation point, but we're not going to go to the blow up point. We're not going to get to that boiling point, because once you get clarity and understanding, it's like, oh, I was over here and you're over there. Like, we are in 2 separate places. Now I'm understanding where you're at. Maybe I had expectations of something, but I didn't discuss it with Alisa, but now I have a clear understanding of what the expectation is. And so we can get out of this conflict cycle and not get to that boiling point.
Yeah. Now, I guess our parents give us, in a lot of ways, those foundation, that first reaction that we have to catch is often that thing that we're given unintentionally.
Sure.
Yeah. And it's trying to move past that and be able to take a deep breath and be curious rather than feel like a victim. It's funny how quickly we can fall into that victimhood.
That's a powerful statement.
Yeah. Even in the most innocent of situations. I was at a funeral and they had put some flowers out at the casket, and they went to go visit it on Mother's Day, and all the flowers were pulled out and tossed all over the place. And the first thought they thought was, somebody's coming here and just taking what they wanted for Mother's Day. But once they started looking, they realized the deer had gotten in there and eaten all the flowers, but I was just, we got tickled. At our first reaction is always, who's done it to us and why are we the victim? And it's shifting that attitude to, well, I'm curious, why did this happen? And, what can I learn from it? Is just a totally different, it's retraining that brain to respond that way.
That is really good, Nathan. And we call this book in our 6 Pillar series is a skill book. This is what we call it. It's a skill book. Future books will be demographic, so for empty nesters or for newlyweds, but we'll also have other skill books, because we believe around conflict, it's a skill. We did, our parents, our grandparents, whoever raised us, that's where we first learned about conflict. And yet, as we grow older and we mature, we can learn the skill to change what we learn, so that way we have the extraordinary marriage we desire. We can change our generation to impact future generations. And so a lot of what we teach in here is that skill. Exactly what you're saying is, hey, I can change. I can be curious. I can learn and not be the victim like I saw growing up.
So true.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And just in that escalation phase, I mean, recognizing that if we've been intentional ahead of time as to getting to know what triggers us and what we need in the process, it can help too, because I do know that, I mean, sometimes part of the need or desire can be not to the point of shutdown where we've taken it to the extreme, but needing a break for a minute. And that is something where I think, sometimes we can be misguided, where we think, okay, well, in order for our relationship to really work, we've got to be on it right now and we have to tackle it. It's okay. Sometimes it's much better to give a little break or give a little space, but when you have a conversation, then you can make a commitment to come back to it, so that it's not that miscommunication of one person left hanging, Tony's ready to have the conversation, and Lisa's like, good for next week.
Right. Can I share a story though, that we had this happen to us maybe about a month or so ago?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I know the story.
So there are some things escalating, and I wasn't able to get Alisa, just her and I, because things were just kept rolling with the business and kids and church and this. And finally, one night, don't advise this.
Because what time was it? If we're going to be honest in the story, what time did you start the conversation?
It's probably like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night.
Okay, just to be clear, that's not my favorite time to start
Right.
serious conversation.
No.
I know Alisa likes to process, so we're in this escalation. I'm in this escalation. Let me rephrase this. I'm in escalation. Alisa has no clue what's going on.
Yeah.
And I've been working through this, and I just said, "Hey, Alisa, we have some time, just you and I need to talk about some stuff with you." And I know she needs a process. So instead of getting to that boiling point and going crazy, it's just I had to share what was happening, and I was more than willing to listen to her and hear her thoughts. But at the big point I want to make is that I knew she needed to process it because I had already been processing. And so what I did was just, hey, I wanted to let you know this. I know you need a process. We're not going to go further in this cycle. I'm going to give you 24, 48 hours, whatever you need. Just let me know so you can process this so we can discuss it.
Yeah.
Not at 10 o'clock at night. So
Yes.
the way for us to get out of that cycle, and as you said, Ashley, process. Sometimes somebody needs a process.
And
I think it speaks to the importance of knowing your personality style and, the tendencies, understanding the 7-second rule is just a real game changer for those that like to have the answer, right immediately. Just to count 7 seconds and give room and space for other thoughts and ideas, because sometimes we just fill it with, what we think is right.
right. Oh, I know I could completely fill the space with retaliation because, he called me last word Ashley for good reason.
It was legitimate.
Yeah. And so, I had to learn that, sometimes silence is better. And for me, that is taking a little bit of a break versus speaking in the heat of the moment. And yeah, you say in there, you repeat what you don't repair. So yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean instant reparation right in that moment.
Correct. Obviously people are wired differently, and just speaking on time for a second, it's important to know that giving the gift of time, like if your partner needs space, right, when your spouse is asking for that is a gift, but the one that has been given time and space needs to give the gift of re-engagement.
Yes.
That's got to be a closed loop. It's got to be a reciprocal thing. You can't just go one way and not go the other way, because you will lose the gift of time if you don't come back and re-engage.
Yes.
That's why I say that. As far as repeating what you don't repair, I can't tell you how many coaching sessions I've had with clients where it's like the same argument. I'm like, okay, well, if you've been doing this cycle for years and years and years before you met me, there's clearly something in that needs to be repaired. There's healing work that still needs to be done. There are things that maybe you haven't been completely honest and authentic with one another on. And so there's just these lingering doubts, fears, insecurities, whatever it might be. And so we need to walk through whether that's forgiveness, whether, there are other healing that needs to be, or even just a conversation. Like sometimes a couple just needs to be, emotionally intimate and have the full conversation around this and how it made one another feel, so that situation can be repaired and it doesn't keep coming back up. 2 months, 2 years, 20 years down the road.
Yeah.
You got to do business with your stuff. Otherwise it will. Those are the repeated arguments that couples have over and over again.
Oh yeah. We talk so much with our girls about that. And just when we start to see the patterns, look for the lesson that can be learned.
Yes.
Because oftentimes we've got a very persistent reminder of, hey, there's still something here you can learn. There's still something you can glean from this.
If your brain is saying, here we go again, those are the magic words that, I should pay attention. This go around.
And how do you get off that merry-go-round, right? When you hear the here we go again, or, I know what's going to happen next, then you need to take action on that.
Right.
Because the only behavior you can change is your own. And so if you dance a little differently, you never know what'll happen.
And this can be used, Ashley and Nathan, as you were saying, with your girls. Like the conflict cycle can be used as a parent to child. We have 2 of our own. So believe me, we've had to work through them and practice with them. This can happen in a work environment. This can happen within your home. It could happen with your parents, your aunts and uncles, your grandma and grandpa. It could happen at church. So you can take this and understand it and begin to share it with others, because if they understand it as well, what happens in those relationships?
Absolutely.
They get strengthened. You know what I mean? We're not doing the same dance over and over again.
Right.
May not be as willing as you are, but that's all right. You always look at what can I do, and you step in there and and you take the step forward to breaking that conflict cycle.
Yes. Well, because so often for when we desire to cultivate a healthy relationship in our homes, I mean, that is so much a direct reflection of how we're going to navigate everything else. We just leading up to this, we've had a marriage focus again. And so Nathan and I have talked about the importance of incorporating play. And last week we talked about the importance of intimacy. And we said then, like, even though we were talking about sexual intimacy and physical, but looking at both aspects of both physical and sexual intimacy between a couple, we also, I shared in there how, my willingness to go there with Nathan, to have the discussions and to be open and willing enough with him to go there on the sexual intimacy aspect also allowed me to better understand my own body, know what I liked, know myself, gain confidence in myself, which then translates to me being more confident in how I'm interacting with my children around my own body, how I'm going to interact and more easily engage with, hugging or, laying an affectionate hand on anybody because I'm comfortable with that intimacy and touch. And so we can categorize so many different relationships, yet so much of what you do in one is such an impact and a ripple effect to others, for sure.
And our ability to manage our conflict, I think, has been a big driver for us to have that level of intimacy.
Right.
Because of our something. Because if you're in constant chaos, it's really hard to be close to somebody that you're angry with.
It's true.
So, if you can, and again, teaching your children how to manage disagreements is really critical. We don't always have those conversations until the heat of the moment. And having that preemptive conversation of, how do you deal with conflict when you feel upset? How have you dealt with it in the past? And have you thought about playing with any other ways of acting and behaving in that environment? Is an important conversation to have, I think, with our children.
And living in an itty bitty RV, we don't really have any space to get away. So
Right.
if there's going to be any conflict, like, we know we've got people listening in, and on that point, though, I would say, for those of you listening and navigating conflict, hey, your children are watching. They are listening. They do know what's going on. Since I was young, I have sensed the energy in a room. Sure. I can sense the tension when we walk into a room on how people are doing and everything. And so for that reason, I think there's two parts to it. Number one is recognizing that, yes, we want to handle conflict around our children and help them to see a healthy way of doing it. Mm-hmm. And two, I think it can also be valuable for parents to have that time to have some intentional conversations without children around, and to be able to establish from the front end. And because, Nathan and I want to be a unified front with our children, and I do want them to see that we disagree at times, and that's fine. Yet also, as the safety and the sanctuary, as their parents, we also want them to know, hey, we're a unified front, and we're not, even in our disagreement, we'll work through this, and we want to work through this. So I think there's so much power in being proactive and navigating the conflict, because it will happen and it will impact more than just your relationship. It carries over to your children, to your work, to everything else, based on how you're handling it, for sure.
100%. And it was interesting because even in writing this book, I was asked to speak at a business event, and to your point about demonstrating what it looks like to fight well in front of your children, to show them that you can have disagreements. I was presenting this before the book was even done, and somebody was like, well, what if you're raised in a single parent family and you didn't see it?
Yes.
And, what I want to say to that is that, one, there are other role models and that you can observe from, but two, if you are the type of parents that say, we don't ever want to see our kids to see us fight, your kids will grow up to be adults who don't know how to handle
right
in their own marriage what it looks like with their disagreements. So, you don't have to show every fight to your children.
No.
I'm not in favor of that, but allow them to see the two of you work through disagreements, because that's actually skill development that they're catching.
Yes.
Mhm.
That is a gift to your children, their grandchildren and generations to come, that they learn how to see it, and they know that it's normal that husbands and wives don't agree 100%.
And I think that's so
Yes.
important how foundational that is, because it's so generational. I mean,
Mhm.
the impact that you can have on, the next generation is huge in the way you approach conflict.
So
100%.
so in your years of doing all of your coaching, if you were to if we're a brand newly married couple coming to you and saying, okay, we want to be proactive in this, what kind of conversations do we need to have? We think we've covered it all. What are some hot spot topics you say this is where we want to handle how you're going to navigate conflict?
I think it's really important to have those conversations about, what each one of you saw growing up. What did it look like in your family? What were there's a page in the workbook that kind of highlights some of the stuff, but what did it look like for your parents to fight? What were their behaviors? What did they fight about? Because that's going to give you're a newlywed, you haven't, you're a weekend, you're like, we're good. This is going to be amazing. We got 50 years ahead of us, piece of cake. And then like somewhere around the end of the first month, you will have that moment where you look at your new spouse and you're like, whoa, you are so different than I thought you were.
Uh-huh.
And this is where those conversations can start to happen, because as marriage is an ever growing, it's an opportunity to learn.
Exactly.
And we have to take advantage of those opportunities to learn. So when you find yourself going, that's really different than me, ask the question, I'm so curious about you, honey, this behavior or this remark or whatever, like, tell me where that came into your life.
Yeah.
Because I want to know you better, and you'll be able to start to connect the dots. And if you both are doing that, what a gift you give to your young marriage.
Mm-hmm.
One, establish curiosity from the get-go, but to dig deep so that it's not just taking what's at the surface and going, oh, well, this is just how my spouse is. No, go back a few layers, find out where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And when you dig deeper into where it came from, then you also get to dig deep into choosing whether or not you want to hold on to that and what you want to carry forward. For sure. I love that, because so often we think of hot spots, the trigger points being, finances or extended family or whatever. But so even based on that question that you just asked about how did your family fight, it can also give you that idea of, okay, what's going to potentially feel like a friction point just by being voiced, even if it hasn't been. Because if finances were always a friction point in your previous or in your family of origin, then you can come in fresh with a finance clean slate, and yet the instant finances are brought up, it can become a point of conflict just because that was that tension in your childhood.
Well, and it allows the two of you to be proactive. Because let's say you hear, well, my parents always fought about finances. Okay, well, let's talk about how we're going to approach this. Is it important for us to have a regular, monthly money meeting? Is it important for us to, do you want a spreadsheet? Do you want to have, look at all of the accounts at one time? Or is it better for you to just do this in like 10-minute increments, but we'll do 10 minutes once a week? Like you can start the relation. And in all honesty, if you've been married 20 years, it's not too late to do this. Right. It's a choice.
Yes.
Choice to say, hey, this is where we've had tension, or this is where we could have tension. What's going to be our plan going forward? What are going to be our action steps?
And I found eliminating the need for other people to read your mind is a really helpful tip in lowering conflict.
Yes.
Being open, like when we even first launched to RV, we had a discussion on, this is what would make me tense if we got below, this point financially. So if we know that, we know, Nathan's nervous about, next stages here. So, we found that placing things in that I call dummy proofing, so that everybody knows where the buoys are, where, this makes Nathan nervous, this makes Ashley nervous. So if we stay between there, everybody's good. That's been very helpful in our own relationship.
Oh, yeah.
That's a gift.
Yeah.
I mean, having those types of conversations and being vulnerable at that level, there's a reason emotional intimacy is the workhorse, because when you can have those kinds of conversations, you set yourself up for success, because now you know where your guardrails are. And
Right.
you can be proactive about staying within your guardrails and keeping both of you feeling safe. It's huge.
Mhm. Yeah, going back to parenting again, I mean, we talk about bathtub boundaries with an ocean of love. I mean, giving your kids no boundaries whatsoever can be really can end up being more detrimental than it is advantageous. And so, just like you can drop a kid in a bathtub and they can have a blast playing with their toys and it's all fun with the walls and everything and they're contained, drop them in the middle of the ocean, it can be terrifying. They don't know which way's up and how deep it is and anything else. When we put parameters around any of our relationship, it doesn't mean rules and regulations we're boxed and we can't move. It gives us, those guidelines for better communication between each other.
I love that. That's a great analogy. I really like that because it's true. Like, I mean, you're in a bathtub, you know where you're standing, you know how deep it is, you know what's going on. But yeah, you get dropped in the middle of the ocean. We were just in Cancun and we didn't get dropped in the middle of the ocean, but we swam out to like a sandbar, which wasn't that far off.
It was that far.
It wasn't that far.
That far.
I'm with you, Lisa. Yeah, I agree.
It was really that far. I thought I was going to drown at one point in time. Eye contact on my head. I'm like, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
Wasn't that far from the water line, from the beach. But even so, like Alisa said, I mean, she was just in this spot where the waves are coming, they're rolling, and she was just like, I'm going to drown. And I'm like, you're not going to drown. Just stay focused on me. But that's vastly different. And we weren't in the middle of the ocean. You get in the middle of the ocean, you're really upside down, no clue where you're at. You know what I mean? So I love that analogy.
You could still see the coast, to be clear.
You could.
Well, man, I love the extra analogy that you just added into it too, that when you are in uncharted territory and when you don't know where the boundaries are, I'm with you. I'm by your side. I don't know either, but let's figure it out together. And coming as a team to it to say, hey, I got you on this is such a powerful thing.
Right. Rather than firing criticism of you should do this or try that. Or
get over it. It's beautiful. Yeah.
Not my favorite.
Yeah, exactly. You are not experiencing what I'm experiencing.
May have said that a few times in our 26 years.
Maybe it's coming.
Yeah. Okay, well, as we wrap it up here, I want to let you leave any last words and kind of share what truly causes change in a marriage.
Well, the reality is that only one thing causes change, because nothing changes until the actions in your marriage change. We can't wait for our feelings. We can't wait to feel like I, want to do conflict better or feel like I love you to re-engage. When you take action, you create the opportunity for connection.
Yes.
So don't hole up in your own corner and say, I'm just going to wait till my spouse does it. Be the one to go first. And if two people are going first, an interesting thing happens. You both meet together.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Okay, and so share with us the full title of your book again. I've got the 6 Pillars of Intimacy, Conflict, but I want the full stretch here.
Sure, and I'll even flash it for all of you that are watching it on YouTube. So it's the 6 Pillars of Intimacy, Conflict Resolution, and the subtitle is The Secret to Breaking the Conflict Cycle in Your Marriage.
Okay, we highly recommend grabbing this book. It gives you some easy, applicable steps to walk through, and so often, sometimes if we're hitting something that might be a touchy subject to start with, it helps to kind of have an outside third party. And so having something like a book with a little worksheet you fill out, then it's, we're filling out the worksheet, we need to do this together, as opposed to I'm putting you on the spot or grilling you. So it is a great opportunity to walk through and just open that door to conversation on how conflict is working in your life, and if there are any opportunities for improvement that are going to create a more positive ripple effect through the rest of your life.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Fantastic. You summed it up great.
All right. Well, perfect.
Thank you both.
Yes, you can find Tony and Alisa at oneextraordinarymarriage.com. I'll have links to all of their info, including to this book, in the blog as well. And thank you so much for joining us today. We so love talking marriage with you.
Always good to catch up.
Yes.
Always fun to see you guys.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right. Thank you. And remember, the uniqueness in each of us strengthens all of us. Namaste.
1, 2, 3. Up with the rising sun, already on the run. Mama says namaste. Life is a tangled mess. your stress. Mama says namaste. 'Cause today I will stand up and be all the change that I want to see in this world. Boys and girls, you gotta have to stand up to be free. Namaste in your heart. Take a deep breath in and let's start a brand new day. With Mama says namaste.